talk about how much, let's say, like uber focused training did you do based on the muscle groups that you needed to work post injury when you started in your tennis journey? And back in the 80s, how conscious were you of that? Or is it more, if I play more, it builds more, and it's kind of like a self-fulfilling situation?
That's a great question, because nowadays, even in wheelchair tennis, we almost take it for granted. Everyone's got their team and they've got access to higher levels of training and more intensive training and more sport specific training and mental conditioning and nutrition and everything else. I mean, it really is the full focused package on producing the best athlete that I can with the talents and abilities that I have. Back when I started playing, we were mostly self-taught, and it was pretty much recreational. It was just, we're just out here because we enjoy sports, we enjoy doing something, enjoyed the social aspect, of hanging out with friends, hitting tennis balls kind of thing. But there was no prize money. It wasn't like there were tournaments and there were opportunities to compete. You could win a trophy, but the incentives that there are today did not exist back in the day. Just like, pre-Grand Slam era, pre-Open era, amateur status for, tennis in general kind of thing. It's evolution over the eras and those types of things. And so we played, but we didn't have somebody standing there every day. You got to do this, you got to do that. You didn't do this, you didn't do that. Let's work on this, let's change that. We got together, we went through drills as a group, we split off and played singles or doubles kind of thing. We played tournaments, but we were just kind of learning on our own and figuring out on our own. And so back then, I watched the para athletes, the Brad Parkses and the Randy Snows type of thing. And I just watched what they did. And I thought, if I want to be more serious about this, because if I was going to do it, I got to a point in 1984 is when I played my first tournament, and I had some wins in 84. And that was like, hey, this is kind of fun. Not only playing, competing, traveling, but winning feels pretty good too. I kind of liked it.
that part
right?
Never changes, right?
That never changes wherever you are and at whatever level you're playing, right? And so I started thinking, how far can I take this? Because not that we were looked down upon in any way, shape, or form, but as quads, we were looked at as different than the paras. And obviously, again, because back in those days, the physical function was pretty obvious. When you watched a quad player playing, you could tell that they had some upper extremity limitations as they were doing what they were doing on the court. But I thought, why can't I push a little faster? Why maybe can't I get a little stronger? Why can't I get a little smarter with what I do? And so I would watch those guys. Well, how did they make that turn? How did they attack that ball? How did they recover? I talked to them, what do you do for training? I remember Randy Snow talking to me. It was raining at one event and he found a parking garage, went inside so he could do some hill work in the parking garage and just hit balls kind of thing. Yeah. Oh. But it was like, what do I need to do to raise the standard of my abilities on that court to give myself a better chance to win? And so those were some of the things that I started looking at. And we started having camps and clinics, and we could get together with coaches and get more direct coaching.
Okay, so who's we? How many people? What regions? Is this a local thing that kind of it's like you draw a circle and then it's a bigger circle and then it's a bigger circle? Or are we meeting from different cities around the country, kind of a meetup situation?
Yes to both. So in Southern California, because the National Foundation of Wheelchair Tennis was established there, that was kind of the hotbed of wheelchair tennis. We had 11 or 12 tournaments from Santa Barbara to San Diego and Inland Empire. So we could play a lot of tennis there. But as it continued to grow, now it's, in other places around the country. The first international tournament was in 1983, if I remember correctly. So shortly after, the NFWT was founded in 1980, and that was the same year that we had our first U.S. Open Wheelchair Tennis Championships back then, pre-Grand Slam era, but that was our big tournament kind of thing that everybody wanted to attend, everybody wanted to try to win. So a lot of people were still coming to Southern California, but it grew from there, like you said, bigger circles, other parts of this country, other parts of the world, to where we are now, 140 or 50 tournaments, I think, on the ITF tour.
140 tournaments on the ITF tour.
Yeah,
And that's all age
the
ranges.
world.
Sorry to interrupt. That's all age ranges.
Yep.
That's junior tennis through, pro slams,
Yeah,
whatever.
adult. Yep. Yeah,
Okay,
we've
wow.
got a total. That's about the total number, if I'm remembering correctly, somewhere in that ballpark currently on the tour. So lots of play opportunities now. So yeah, it grew, it mushroomed, it expanded over the years. But the we back in the day was just other folks in Southern California and at that class at Saddleback College. But then as other players, Randy got involved. He's from Texas. And so Texas started growing a program. Somebody else from another area hears about it or comes to a tournament, something starts growing their kind of situation. And so now you're starting to get other coaches that are trying to help those local programs, and they're collaborating. What are you doing? What are you doing? And they get together at tournaments and they're sitting talking and, oh, I see he's doing that. Where did that come from? So now some coaching education is kind of getting developed to say, let's put some camps and clinics together, introduce this sport to even more people, and give them a better teaching experience initially than maybe they would get just grabbing a can of balls and a racket and going out on a court with their friends. And so, like everything, that evolution of coaching and training and all of those things grew through the years as, again, once prize money starts getting introduced and Paralympic opportunities, and the ITF has their world rankings and year-end world champions, when those things start coming online, people are willing to get a little more serious about what they want to do because, like you said, winning never gets old, and we all want to have that.
So as you're talking through this, I have so many questions. So your injury occurred when you were 19 years old. It was a car accident. You build up a couple years later, correct me on the timelines if I'm wrong. A couple years later, you start playing. And then you become a part of a community. Was that community similar in age, or is the assumption wrong that you were maybe one of the younger people in that community? And what does junior wheelchair tennis look like now? What are the age ranges we're dealing with when it becomes maybe more popular or more available? You see what's the kind of tipping point age where you start seeing interest these days?
Great question, because it's going to lead into juniors, and I love talking about juniors. So for me initially, and again, back in the day with spinal cord injuries specifically, the average age was in the late teens to early 20s. So I was average from that standpoint. Most injuries happened, whether it was a recreational accident, a car accident, whatever it was, the spinal cord injuries, the statistics show that it was typically, 18, 19 to 20, 21 years old.
Is that just based on growth with individuals at that point, and like when an injury can affect you, or is that a dumb question?
No, not at all. It's like I say, I think it's a function of the lifestyle.
Okay.
You're at an age where you're looking at doing things that sometimes maybe a little crazy, maybe a little riskier behavior. And so some of those were just accidents as a result of that. Now, you've always also still had kids who maybe were born with a disability or had something happen earlier in life, cancer, like Esther. She had cancer, and through surgery, they nicked part of her spinal cord as they were trying to get that tumor out. And she was, I don't think she was 8. I think that's when it was diagnosed. I want to say 11, but don't quote me on the numbers there. She can tell it, but she was young. And one of the neat things that the NFWT did in the early years is they developed junior wheelchair sports camps. And they would bring these kids together. Again, we were in Southern California, so track and field, tennis, swimming, archery, basketball, just opportunities for these kids and the families to come out and see that recreation was possible, to see that maybe more was possible than a lot of times we thought, that I'm in a wheelchair, I've got an injury, I've got a disability, what does life hold for me, kind of thing. And these things were happening with the NFWT, those programs increased. And so mine was I was 19. We weren't doing anything wrong per se. It was just a car accident. They happen every day, unfortunately. But the age back then of everybody that was in my group, so to speak, probably had a spinal cord injury somewhere in their late teens, early 20s. That was by far the norm for that initial group that I was involved in. So then, if you want, let's fast forward to today for a minute and talk about juniors. You okay with transitioning to that? And it's just exciting to me because, again, I was involved with the NFWT a little bit. I recognized the benefits that I got out of other people doing what they did that helped give me the opportunities that I got to enjoy. So for me, trying to give back, trying to help was something that I wanted to do. And being fortunate to be involved with those junior wheelchair sports camps in the early years was something that I really appreciated. And fast forward to a little bit of a timeline nowadays, in 1998, the governance for wheelchair tennis in the U.S. transitioned from the NFWT to the USTA. So 1998, the USTA takes over the governance of wheelchair tennis. Moves along, progresses, continues the programming, everything else that the NFWT had been doing and trying to advocate for and expand opportunities and those types of things. In 2017, there was a little bit more of a focus and a push to look at the junior space. Because at the time, we had 2 to 3 dozen juniors actively playing, competing, traveling in tournaments. But the thought was, we've got this whole collegiate pathway, just like any other kid has. And if you look at the whole plan and view of tennis, you can start from a young age and go on through to, your 80s and 90s. They talk about it being a sport for a lifetime, but even from a competitive pathway standpoint, because we now have international tournaments and more opportunities, and juniors were included in World Team Cup, and juniors are included now at the Grand Slams since 2022, if I remember correctly, at the U.S. Open, first one for that. But they looked at that pathway for juniors and thought about, what about this collegiate space? Scholarships and education, just like anybody else. Go to school, get a degree, compete in tennis, see what the future holds. If you're good enough, there's opportunities to continue on that competitive pathway, but you've established something in your life that's going to help you going forward one way or the other. The integration took place in 2021 at the USTA, where it wasn't like separate wheelchair tennis. So under player development, it became a fully integrated aspect of everything that the USTA focused on.
Understood. So there wasn't separate budgets. It was part of the overall budget for player development.
They still had maybe a budget per se, but it's like, okay, everything that player development has, everything that high performance has, everything that we do in marketing, everything that we do in every other business unit at the USTA, we're going to be thinking about wheelchair tennis as well. We don't just expect the wheelchair tennis department to be thinking about those things. So as they started to integrate those types of things, we saw that pathway, especially for the juniors, develop, grow, and blossom through that particularly. And as I mentioned, 2022 was the first Grand Slam junior event at the US Open. Now, because of what's happened, we've gone from a couple dozen wheelchair tennis junior players to several hundred wheelchair tennis juniors. Now, it doesn't sound like a lot in the grand scheme of the total population, but you've got to keep in mind that the wheelchair sports community is much smaller than the general population at large. Then the number of those that are interested in playing tennis is even smaller than that. The number that are interested in pursuing it at an elite level and have the resources to do it is even smaller than that. So it's a huge increase for us, even though the number doesn't sound that big, but you think about going from a couple dozen to several hundred, what that does. We went from 2 full-time, if you will, programs at 2 colleges and universities to now having 15 colleges and universities that are recognized by the ITA with their wheelchair tennis programs.
Yeah.
2020. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, like, you keep underselling the number. I played in Kalamazoo in juniors enough times, and that's like the Super Bowl of junior tennis in America, and there's 196, which felt like it was too big of a draw. Right? So you're saying a couple hundred. That's kind of the equivalent for our national championship in able-bodied tennis. So Like I could dump your own argument on its head pretty quickly, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, everything is relative, right? From a percentage standpoint, when we now have our collegiate championships, 15 is way better than 2 as far as the number of colleges that are being represented. So with the ITA governance, we see that there's even more possibility. They first included team competition at the USTA National Campus in 2023. The NCAA also had an exhibition at their championships in 2024. And they're now looking at the potential under the emerging sports aspect of what the NCAA does, at seeing what can we do to get wheelchair tennis and maybe even some other wheelchair sports more integrated into the NCAA ecosystem. So all of a sudden, all these juniors that, again, these opportunities didn't exist when I was a kid. Now they have these opportunities, and it's so incredible to see what's happening. One of the other things that I think is really cool about this, 2 things actually, but one, Jason and the others had an integrated camp with some of the able-bodied junior boys and girls and some of the wheelchair players. And it's like, okay, we're going to do drills. We're going to do sprints. Some of you are going to get in a chair and see what that's like. We're all going to go in the gym, and these young boys in the wheelchairs, it's all upper body strength to get that chair around. They're out working, bench pressing, numbers that these other juniors can't imagine, kind of thing. And now they're establishing these friendships and relationships. So as they go to the Grand Slams, as they go to these other events, now they're connecting with each other. We're seeing some of our juniors now living full time in Orlando and training at the national campus, just like, we got Ben there, and things like that. And so that pathway, that experience is now fully open and available to wheelchair tennis players, and in particular our juniors, as they're progressing through the space.